So 2025 was supposed to be a huge comeback year for Hollywood. Instead, it's turning into an absolute catastrophe for the entire movie industry. The big question is, what went so wrong? Well, that's what we're here to break down. Let's get into the analysis of how Hollywood ended up in this complete nosedive.
And just to be clear, the situation is pretty dire. I mean, we're not just talking about a slow year. It's being called one of the most depressing stretches in the history of cinema. The last part of the year, especially, has been a total disaster, really defined by one box office flop after another, and audiences just not caring.
And this number, this is right at the heart of the crisis. $385 million. That's the entire amount of money the domestic box office made for the whole month of October 2025. To put that into perspective, that is the worst October the industry has seen in nearly 30 years.
Now, you might look at this and go, wait, 1997 had the same number, but that's where inflation really tells the story. See, that $385 million from back in 97 is actually worth around $700 million today. So the real takeaway isn't just that we're doing worse than 1997, it's that we're doing about half as well. And that is a staggering, staggering drop.
It's just a shocking decline, right? Especially when the industry's whole mantra was just survive till 25, banking on this massive turnaround. Well, that clearly didn't happen. So let's really unpack how we got to this point, starting with the most immediate causes.
The problem that kicked everything into high gear was the autumn movie season itself. It was just littered with these high-profile failures. I mean, there was a complete lack of anything people actually wanted to go out and see, which led to empty theaters and triggered this historic slump.
Okay, first up, you had the month's big blockbuster hope, Tron Ares. The analysis calls this a perfect example of a studio just scraping the bottom of the barrel for any old IP they could find. But instead of reigniting a beloved franchise, it just landed with a thud. It failed to connect with old fans, and it definitely didn't find any new ones. And it wasn't just tired sequels either. Even this high-profile movie starring a massive star like The Rock, an attempt to mix his box office power with some indie street cred, it completely missed the mark. It just came and went without anyone even noticing. And then, of course, you have your classic Oscar bait film. This breakdown describes it as a political lecture that felt like it was about a decade too late, released to an audience that, according to this, is just completely tired of being preached to from the big screen.
And the list of disappointments just kept on coming. Black Phone 2. It did okay for a horror sequel, but it wasn't some huge cultural moment. Good Boy had a cool premise, but made basically no impact at all. And then there's the really bizarre case of Frankenstein. Here you have this potential hit from Netflix, but they only gave it a super short run in theaters, pretty much just enough to qualify for awards, before yanking it onto streaming, leaving even more money on the table.
But here's the thing. The autumn collapse didn't just happen out of nowhere. The stage was actually set months earlier. This analysis argues that a really deeply uninspiring summer movie season is what killed the audience's desire to go to the movies in the first place.
And look, this chart right here is a perfect illustration of what we mean by franchise fatigue. Jurassic World Rebirth was technically the summer's biggest movie, but calling it a win is kind of misleading. It earned over $130 million less than the movie before it. The analysis calls it completely forgettable, and that kind of cultural amnesia is reflected right there in the declining box office.
And the rest of the summer pretty much tells the same story. The big, hyped-up Superman reboot, it barely cleared $600 million, a huge disappointment for a hero that iconic. Another Mission Impossible sequel also underwhelmed. And what were the other big successes? Live-action remakes of cartoons that are 20 years old, cashing in on the nostalgia of millennial parents.
So when you put all that together, the analysis sums up the effect of that summer with a really powerful phrase, a heady cocktail of forgettability and apathy. Instead of creating these must-see cultural events that got people excited, the summer just left audiences feeling meh. They were underwhelmed, uninspired, and had very little reason to rush back to theaters in the fall.
But beyond just the bad movies of 2025, the analysis points to some much deeper systemic problems. Cracks in the foundation that have been forming for years and are now finally breaking wide open.
One of the biggest issues has to be the streaming dilemma. Theatrical windows have gotten so short, and audiences are smart. They've been trained to just wait it out. I mean, why would you pay for an expensive theater ticket for a movie you're only kind of curious about when you know for a fact it's going to be on a streaming service you already pay for in just a few weeks?
And this really lays out the choice that viewers are facing now. On one side, you've got the cinema, with ticket prices going up and the risk of a bad experience with other people. And on the other side, you've got the comfort of your own home, where awesome setups are more affordable than ever. For more and more people, that choice is becoming a no-brainer. Okay, so this is where the analysis gets into its most controversial point. And it asks a tough question. Has Hollywood's own culture been actively pushing away a massive part of its own customer base for the better part of a decade?
And to illustrate this point, the analysis uses Jennifer Lawrence as an example of a recent shift in thinking. The argument here is that after years of celebrities being really vocal about their politics, there's this slow realization happening inside the industry that, hey, a huge chunk of the audience doesn't share those views, and they really don't want to be lectured.
Ultimately, the conclusion drawn in this source material is a pretty blunt one. It argues that after years of what it calls creative decisions that alienated large parts of the audience, Hollywood is slowly, painfully relearning a basic lesson. When your entire goal is mass-market entertainment, injecting divisive politics is just bad for business.
So, after a historically terrible year that was built on all these long-term problems, what does the future actually hold for Hollywood? Where does it go from here?
And that brings us to the central question this whole analysis is posing. Is this just a temporary slump that they'll bounce back from? Or are we actually watching the beginning of a permanent decline, as cinema just loses more and more ground to other things like gaming and streaming?
The analysis concludes by letting out a very stark choice, a crossroads that will probably define the entire future of cinema as we know it.
So on one hand, you've got Path A. Hollywood returns to its roots, focusing on pure mass-market entertainment that brings absolutely everyone to the theater. But then there's Path B. It continues to slide into cultural irrelevance and eventually gets replaced by AI-generated content and up-and-coming foreign film industries. According to this analysis, the choice Hollywood makes next won't just define 2026, it's going to define the future of movies themselves.